Hello, I'm Fiona from the Oxford Reading Hive team, and this afternoon I am joined by the marvellous Gill Lewis, author of Skyhawk, Gorilla Dawn, and her most recent novel, which is in front of us, The Closest Thing to Flying. Thank you for popping in to see us today. To start with, we always have a question from the previous interviewee, and so that was Sally Nichols, and she wanted to know, if you were given £1 million, what conservation project or what sort of issue would you put it towards?
Oh, £1 million. There would be so many, it's hard to choose, but I think it would have to be a charity that conserves wild space, because one of the biggest problems we've got in the world today is that we're losing wild space for wild animals, for flora. So it would have to be a charity that did that, and one is the World Land Trust, with projects all around the world. But close to home, I think the Wildlife Trusts are excellent for rural rewilding, and also in urban areas and cities. They're having lots of places like brownfield sites which help lots of insects. But I think one of the biggest challenges and changes I'd love to see would be rewilding our uplands, where we have our hillsides are sort of these bare hillsides that we've got. They shouldn't be like that. We should have lots and lots of different mixed habitats of bogs and woodlands and moorlands. And so Rewilding Britain was another project. I think I'd give it to something like that to really rewild so much of our country and bring back the eagles and the hen harriers and so many things. That would have to be that.
Wonderful, thank you. So you initially trained as a vet. We were wondering sort of at what point you decided to become a writer and sort of change vocation, or have you always written? What was the catalyst?
I've always loved stories, and as a child I would write stories and I would draw lots of stories. There'd be comic books. Okay. But I wasn't very good at English. My spelling wasn't very good, my grammar wasn't brilliant, my handwriting was really messy because I'm left-handed. But I loved stories. But when I went to secondary school, suddenly we stopped writing stories, and all my work had red lines through it, my spelling and my grammar. And I was told I wasn't very good at English, and because of that I fell out of love with books and stories, and there was this huge gap. But because I loved sciences, I studied sciences and went on to become a vet because of my interest in animals. And it was only really having my own children, then going to the library, getting lots of books out for them, and seeing them turn over the pages, and these stories, going to different places, meeting these different characters, and I fell in love with books again. And I started writing stories for them, and they told me stories. And because people say you often write about what you love, I write about animals and wild spaces, and also people and our relationship with the natural world.
Lovely. And we're wondering if you've sort of taken any creative inspiration from your veterinary career. Were there any sort of moments when you were working with animals, or have directly inspired stories, or have they appeared in them?
I think many of my books have had so much inspiration. I think specifically working as a vet and having wild animals brought in.
Did you sort of travel?
I've travelled, but actually one of the most poignant memories is actually in this country of having a buzzard which had been knocked by a car and it had some concussion, and it was rehabilitating this buzzard and then being able to release it to the wild, and it's just this moment where you're holding this bird in your hands and you can feel it tense up, and then releasing it up into the sky, and you're giving it back to its wild space, and it's it's beyond words really. It's a really powerful moment, and I think I've tried to write that moment as best I can in several of my books, in Skyhawk and in Sky Dancer. To get that moment there.
Sort of share that for other people who are not necessarily going to experience it. Wonderful. So in this one, The Closest Thing to Flying, which I just absolutely loved, all of it, the cover, it's just an amazing book. You combine two stories, which sort of on the face of it sound very different. You have Samira's modern story as an Eritrean refugee, and a hen story, which is in basically 1891, charting the creation of the RSPB and suffrage movements, which are some of the props that we've got here. They're both connected by a hat. buy a bike and buy a diary. So can you tell us just a little bit about how these stories sort of were inspired you to sort of bring them together, and was it sort of an easy process for you? Did it naturally evolve, or?
As you say, there are just so many themes which sort of are thrown into the pot, and it's difficult to sort of know where to unpick it, but I think it really started when I read about the founders of the RSPB, which is the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. Yeah. And I read an article which said these founders were women, and I thought, this is fantastic. And what they were campaigning against was the use of feathers and birds in hats and in fashion. They were saying, well, this is just destroying all this wildlife, decimating this wildlife worldwide. So they recognised this. Yeah. So I think that was the point. And then I was expecting these women to be very forthright, standing up. They were speaking out for the birds. I thought they'd speak out for the women too.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They were actively anti-suffrage. They didn't want women to have the vote. And they were very much a product of their time, that they felt that men's role was to be in charge. So that got me to thinking, well, what's the difference between then and now, and what are our different perspectives between then and now? So I tried to bring those three things: conservation, women's rights, and perspective of time, all into the book. And I felt the way to do it was through this little green bird on this hat, because the bird is significant to hen back in Victorian times, and the bird is very significant to Samira in modern day times. She recognises it, so this becomes a really powerful emblem through the book.
It's amazing. We've been asking authors a little bit about their approaches to research. I'm sort of guessing doesn't maybe feel like research when you're sort of so passionate about the subject. But can you tell us a little bit about the role of research within your writing?
Yeah, research is so important, and sometimes it can be frustrating. But I think most of all, it's this wonderful mystery tour where you start off on one thing. So I think I start off on women's rights, and then you sort of find out that actually one of the things that really helped women was the humble bicycle. So you start reading, well, what's the history of the bicycle? And then you start reading, well, bicycles changed when they went to pneumatic tyres, air-filled tyres, and rubber tyres. And then you think, well, where does rubber come from? That came from Belgium. So that came from the Congo, where the Belgians were colonising. So there are lots of problems there. And it's just endless. It's infinite research. And I love it because you're constantly learning. But it's then how do you do all this research? It's then how to sort of bring all that back and put it into the book. So it's such an important part, but fascinating.
Do you have sort of notebooks and research from things that you thought you were going to use, and then you've ended up not using it, and it's maybe helps with something else that you develop?
So it often goes into the next book. Or sometimes you just research something. I remember for one of my books, White Dolphin, I researched all the different types of boats, their sails, how these boats were made, and then the description of the boat was in 2 lines. but I had to have an image of this boat in my head. So, and then that goes into another story. Nothing is ever wasted.
Brilliant. You've written a lot about sort of displaced children, as well as vulnerable and endangered animals. But you sort of throughout your novels, they're often children are seen as sort of agents for positive change. I think there's a sort of sense of empowerment throughout all of your novels. What for you would be sort of an ideal result of someone reading one of your novels?
Oh, I would love somebody reading one of my novels to feel that they themselves could be an agent for change, perhaps within their own life or somebody else's life. And change doesn't always necessarily have to be a big, heroic thing. It can be a small thing, creating a little wildlife space in your garden. It can be just one small random act of kindness to make somebody smile. All these things have effects. And I've been so inspired myself through the initiatives by young people for the Strike for Climate Change. That's incredible, and it just really shows how when young people come together, what they can achieve, what they can say, and they have got, and despite not having a vote, they can have a great voice.
What are your top 3 tips for aspiring writers?
Top 3 tips. Never be afraid. Never be afraid to make mistakes. Never be afraid to try new things. So let's don't be afraid. I think the next thing would have to be write from the heart. Write the book you would love to write for yourself. Put your heart and soul into it. And the third thing would have to be forever curious about the world.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's all of our questions. So it's over to you. Our next author is Alex Bell, who is the author of Polar Bear Explorers Club. What is your question for Alex?
Oh, Alex, I love the idea of exploration of fantasy worlds, of this world. And my question for Alex is, if you could transport yourself to any landscape in any children's book to explore and join in the adventure, which children's book would you jump into? And why? And why?
Thank you. And I think that's all we've got time for today. You can follow us on Twitter at Oxford Ed English, and you can find Gill, who's also there, and it's at Gill hyphen. No, Lord. Underscore. That's the word. Gill __ Lewis. There's two of them there. We've also got a Facebook page, which is the Oxford Reading Hive for secondary schools, where we share these videos as well as resources for schools who want to set up book clubs. So please join us there and ask any questions we can help. So please check it out.